There's no doubt that the fantasy football playoffs are hard and every decision matters, but there are a few secret strategies that experts are gatekeeping from you that make winning a fantasy football championship that much easier. So from somebody inside the space and somebody that knows this information, I'm going to expose to you the 9 unethical, I guess you could call it, strategies for the fantasy playoffs that everybody and possibly your league mates are hiding from you. So subscribe or have this video saved somehow, whatever way you want, to come back to it every single year. But I know for a fact, I can remember and you can remember a time where we see an insanely good team in the playoffs on paper get destroyed and bounced out way earlier than we expected them to. But it's not actually luck. It does come down to one main mistake, the biggest one fantasy managers make, and it's that they make their start sit decisions based on name value only. You've probably heard somebody say a billion times online, start your studs in the fantasy playoffs, don't overcomplicate things, which might sound like it makes sense, but isn't actually a good strategy at all. I mean, look at Justin Jefferson from the 2025 season. You look at him, probably the best, if not one of the best wide receivers in the league, but he's finished outside the top 20 wide receivers, barely averaging 12 fantasy points a game, but he still started in over 90% of leagues. That is not a set it and forget it player. Right now, at this point in the season, you need to be looking at recent game performance, actual usage like snap share, target share, team competitiveness if they're playing for a playoff spot, and upcoming matchups that matter so much more than just the name value. So you need to break out of that mindset, and you'll notice once you do that, something else becomes really, really clear, and that's that your bench starts to look a lot different. Which leads us to our second league winning tip, which is bench optimization strategy. When you look at the quickest way to increase your chances of winning a fantasy championship, the odds are on your bench. And it doesn't really look like it because nobody cares about the bench. You don't start them anyways. But right now, you're probably holding 3 or 4 lottery ticket players, stash players that could turn into something, but you're not actually going to go through and put them in your starting lineup right now. In the fantasy football playoffs, your bench becomes more of a toolbox, I guess you could call it, and less of a stash pile of guys that you hope can turn up into something one day that we were doing in weeks 4, 5, or 6. Because we are playing 1 week at a time, if you lose now, you lose forever, and there is no chance of making that fantasy football championship. If there isn't a clear path for one of your players to get into your starting lineup or be important in the next few weeks for matchup purposes, there's really no reason they should be on your roster, with some caveats we will get into, but you need starting caliber players, defenses and kickers, and the direct insurance for your elite stud players like handcuff running backs. The real trick here is to do this for your team, but more importantly, your opponent's roster, which gets us into tip number 3. The smartest managers in fantasy football don't just improve their team off the waiver wire every single week, they block their opponents from improving theirs. And that is really something that nobody takes into account. Regardless of what round of the fantasy playoffs you're in, you need to be looking at your opponent that you're playing against that week and claim who they need off the waivers before they even get the chance to. For example, if your opponent's starting quarterback just got injured, your top priority on the waivers needs to be the best quarterbacks available, so your league mate can't have him and he has to start somebody worse. That's why we go through and drop the players off our roster that right now might have a higher value, but realistically won't ever be started in our lineup because they're just dead weight on the bench. You should go through and do this for every single position depending on what your opponent needs. Tight ends, a new flex, a defense, which I will get into later in the video because there is a real strategy around that. But possibly the sneakiest strategy next up is your opponent's handcuff running backs, especially the ones owned by the teams you're likely to play in next week's matchup if you do so happen to make it there. Now, you should only take 1, maybe 2 bench spots max to do this if you really believe in yourself to make it to the next round of the playoffs, and only do this if your opponent has a handcuff running back which would come into a workhorse role. For example, guys like Kyle Monangai, if DeAndre Swift gets injured, he is an RB1 taking 100% of the work. Chuba Hubbard, Tyler Algier, probably Bashal Tootin as well from the 2025 season. The last thing you want is your opponent's starting elite tier running back to go down. You think you have a win, but they have their backup sitting on their bench ready to put in the starting lineup. So if you roster their handcuff running backs, you can stop their ceiling before they even get a chance to play them themselves. And once you're finessing matchups at this advanced level, you start to be thinking weeks and weeks and weeks ahead, which is where the real value is compared to your league mates, especially in the defenses. You shouldn't be streaming defenses in playoffs. That's the #1 way to lose fantasy points. People say it all of the time. You should be preloading them. That is the exact strategy that you need to use. And what I mean by this is do not wait until the next week's waivers come up to go through and fight everybody on the waiver wire for the top tier defenses, because there really isn't that many out there every single time. If we're talking from a probability standpoint, you are very unlikely to go through and get the very top option defense anyways when that happens. A clear way to get out of this entire situation is to roster 2, maybe even 3 defenses with really good matchups a week in advance. That way you don't have to fight on the waivers and probably get the scraps compared to everybody else. Again, this also helps you block from your future opponents at this point in the year because they'll be forced to start the bad defense that you will not be stuck with. This is something I do literally every single time, and I don't understand how more people don't talk about it with defenses and kickers as well, because when you get to this time, weather can really be a big part of fantasy football, and it can seriously affect kickers and defenses, but kickers the most. So your top elite kicker that you've been starting all year may be a complete trap in week 16, 17, whatever week you're in, that you don't even know about. Lucky for you, I do post my defense and kicker rankings on this channel updated every single week, so I can solve that problem for you easily. Or you go through, check all the weather apps, make sure your kickers are playing indoors or in good environments, check the game betting totals to make sure the games are high scoring, because if you're starting a kicker in a low scoring game, their upside is very, very low because they're probably not going to make a lot of kicks. So roster those defenses and kickers accordingly 1 week in advance, again, to beat the waiver wire and be ready for the next round of playoffs. And I know that we don't have unlimited bench spots, so we can't always do every single one of these elite strategies. So while you're watching this video, take whichever ones you find most important and use those to your best ability in your league. But sometimes the matchups you're trying to control aren't even your own. The next strategy here is the most unethical tip that I have for you, and it is the waiver lock method. After the waivers clear, a lot of injury news can still pop up, and start sit decisions need to be remade based off that information around your entire league. So one thing that you can do is look at your opponent that you're playing against, see if any of their players are questionable coming into this week or might not play, that they just aren't up to date on yet. Go through and add all these players after the waivers clear so you don't need to waste any fab or priority on them, and then just instantly go through and drop them. That way, when they're put back on the waiver wire, they're locked for a couple of days and cannot be picked back up until the next week of fantasy comes up. Now, in some leagues, the settings do allow you to do this multiple times. You can pick up a player, drop them, pick up a player, drop them, and it doesn't lock your bench. So for leagues that is possible, this is the cheesiest one, and your league mates might actually get mad at you. But either way, you can still go through and pick up a top guy and drop him off your bench if you have an extra spot that you don't need. I would be using a bench spot for that way more than just a random player that is maybe projected a decent amount of points, but you would never be starting, and it really isn't important to your roster. But another strategy that seems completely useless, but I promise you, I've seen it save weeks, save seasons every single time, is never, and I mean literally never, put a Monday night player in a positional slot, always and only in your flex spots. Now, why this is so important is because you never know if a player is going to pop up on the injury report, get ruled out all of a sudden, and a major injury happens, and now you're stuck on the waivers trying to replace, for example, your wide receiver. If you put him in the wide receiver slot, you are only stuck and bound to that position, to whereas if you had put them at the flex, you could pick up running backs, you could pick up tight ends to fill in that spot, and it gives you a lot more options off the waiver wire. So that is one of the biggest tips. And the final tip, if you are really serious about winning fantasy football championships, find a way to get your league commissioner's phone password, computer password, whatever it may be, log into their account, delete everything, and make sure you win a league. But that's going to finish out this video of all the strategies you need. Let me know which ones you're going to use in the comments, and subscribe if you want to get these types of videos every single year to help you win leagues. And I'll see you guys in the fantasy championship.